Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a pretty powerful idea that comes from a single sermon. How do you find something real to hold on to when it feels like the world is just full of fakes? You know that feeling, right? A sense that you're just trying to navigate through this fog of uncertainty, misinformation, and, broken promises. In a world like that, where do you even begin to look for something solid? Something you can count on?
Now, the sermon that is the source for this explainer basically says that this is the central human problem. It argues that our world is really defined by all this confusion and unreliability, and it sets out to offer a very specific kind of solution.
So the answer it gives is built around this idea of a true God, which it defines using 4 key characteristics. And what's cool is that each one is illustrated with a different story from the Bible. And when you put them all together, they form a pretty complete picture. So the journey out of all that confusion, it doesn't begin with just blind faith. Instead, it starts with the idea of a God who actually communicates. The source argues that before you can trust anything, first, there has to be something to hear. The silence has to be broken. And this quote, it comes from this great story about the young Samuel. He keeps hearing a voice calling him, but at first he thinks it's someone else. It's only when he's told to respond with this simple phrase, "Your servant is listening," that the message finally gets through, loud and clear. That readiness to listen, that's the key.
So, according to the sermon, this whole story shows that the true God isn't some distant, silent figure. Nope. Even when the world feels spiritually quiet or even stagnant, a direct communication can cut right through the noise. So this first attribute is revelation, a God who actually speaks. Okay, but if a God speaks, that immediately brings up a huge, critical question. Can you trust what's being said? And that brings us to the second attribute, which tackles the problem of falsehood head on.
The source material pulling from the book of Romans makes a really stark contrast here. On one side, you have human nature, which it describes as fallible. Promises get broken, words can be used to deceive, we're all prone to making mistakes. But on the other side, it presents the divine nature as the complete opposite, eternally consistent, totally unchanging. This verse from Romans, it's pretty uncompromising, and it's really the anchor for the sermon's entire argument. It sets up an absolute standard. It's saying that while human reliability can be, well, let's face it, fragile, divine truth is presented as the ultimate constant. And that's the second attribute, a God who is fundamentally true.
All right, so let's recap. We have a God who speaks and whose words are true. The third attribute is where this gets personal and super practical. The sermon argues this truth isn't just some abstract concept. It's meant to give us clear, actionable direction in our lives.
There's this fascinating and honestly very human story from the book of Jeremiah that shows this perfectly. You've got this group of people, they're in a desperate situation, and they literally beg God for guidance. They swear up and down they'll follow it, no matter what it is. The direction they get back is crystal clear, unambiguous. And what do? They do the exact opposite. And this story just perfectly nails the sermon's point. It shows a God who does provide a clear path forward, but it also shines a bright light on that deeply human struggle to actually follow the guidance, even right after we've promised to. Just because a guide is there doesn't mean we'll actually follow the map. But think about it. Communication can't just be a one-way street, right? For this whole picture to make sense, the flow has to go both ways. And so the sermon's final attribute argues that a true relationship requires listening on both sides. It can't just be a monologue. This plea from one of the Psalms really gets to the heart of this. And notice that little detail. It does not rise from deceitful lips. That's key. This isn't some transactional demand. It's a vulnerable cry, and it's totally rooted in the sincere belief that someone is actually there to hear it. And this is the attribute that kind of transforms the entire concept. The true God isn't just issuing commands from on high. Instead, this paints a picture of an active, responsive relationship, one who listens to sincere, heartfelt prayer. This final piece isn't about truth or guidance. It's all about relationship. So how do these 4 different ideas, speaking, being true, guiding, and responding, all come together? Well, the sermon weaves them all into one single, really powerful metaphor for having stability in a chaotic world. It's like an anchor in a storm. So here's the sermon's logic in a nutshell. For every core human problem it points out, it presents one of these divine attributes as a solution. So you've got confusion and silence. The answer is a God who speaks. You've got falsehood and deception. The answer is a God who is true. Uncertainty and aimlessness. A God who guides.
And for that feeling of isolation and despair, a God who responds.
So, the big conclusion of the sermon is that these four characteristics, when you take them all together, are meant to form this unshakable foundation. They create what the source calls a rock or an anchor, the ultimate source of stability against all the uncertainty that we all face.
After digging into how this one source defines a spiritual anchor, it really leads to a much bigger question, one that's for every single one of us. In the middle of your own life's storms and all its uncertainties, what is it that provides you with stability and truth? What serves as your rock?